Welcome back to another episode of Business Journey Unlocked. I'm excited to be joined by Christian Cruz, founder of Wavepoint Growth Strategies. With over 25 years of experience in the foresight and innovation space, Christian combines deep strategic foresight, trend analysis, and scenario planning, especially across long-term forecasting and innovating culture building. Christian, I'm so excited to talk to you today, especially with everything you're doing at Waypoint. I'm going to turn it over to you to explain yourself and what you're doing at Waypoint Growth Strategies.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an academically trained futurist. I have a master's in foresight from the University of Houston Clear Lake. And since then, I worked about half my career inside corporations doing foresight, innovation, and strategy roles. And then in 2009, went the consulting route and have worked in a wide range of industries with clients in consumer packaged goods, manufacturing, industrial, high tech, medical, entertainment, finance, all sorts of fields. Applying the skills of foresight, but not just in terms of helping companies think ahead, but then to apply that thinking to strategy and innovation.
Let me ask you this, because it's interesting how you decided to go the consulting route back in '09, given what was
hmm
happening around that time. What was the
Yeah.
reason why you kind of pivoted in such a risky environment?
Yeah. I mean, I had a good opportunity to have a bit of runway to start a company. I had a partner who had been doing consulting for a long time, and so we partnered together to start the first. It wasn't Wavepoint at the time. It was called Space Consulting.
Mhm.
Tip: never start a company with a soft vowel at the front. Really hard to explain. Space, what? Um, so it was just a good opportunity to leave. I did think I was a little crazy given, yeah, we're still not quite in recovery from the financial crisis, but it turned out to be great because the large corporations had really kind of cut way back on their personnel and strategy and innovation. You know, that's one of the first places you cut when you're in trouble and in crisis is innovation and just try to keep the lights on. And they didn't really have the money yet to hire the big consulting firms.
Mhm.
But their boards were saying, okay, guys, we've survived the crisis. What's the growth plan? And they all went, I don't know. So it was actually a great time to come in. You could be a small player. You could go after big companies. We ended up working with some of the largest companies in the world as a small shop. So it was actually a perfect time to start. And it's interesting. One of the first speeches I gave back in '09 was at, I think, like a gaming convention in Toronto. And I did some research, and you wouldn't believe the number of companies that either started or significantly grew during recessions and downturns. It's
Mm.
actually an ideal time to start a company or to invest in growth. Um, the companies that do so come out the other end, um, oftentimes industry leaders.
With everything going on, just in life, everything is a calculated risk, but given during the recession time, that's even more calculated risk. So it's just you got kind of have to roll your dice and hope for the best. But it's good how everything worked out for you and the company. Beyond just forecasting, what specific high stake decisions are you helping CEOs and leadership teams make that they can't afford to get wrong?
So it is interesting that, you hire a futurist and you're meant to look 3, 5, 70 years out. Um, but it does turn out that the questions that we ask to help us frame the future end up becoming very important questions for CEOs and the C suites to answer. So oftentimes you can go into a company and ask them, hey, what's your strategy? What's your ambition? What's your strategic intent? And you'll get a different answer from every single person you talk to. And so the first thing that we do when we go in is we say, what is your strategic intent? We clarify that for folks inside the organization and we feed it back to them. And so even before we started looking at the future, we've already helped them by creating a consensus point of view about what their existing strategy is. We also ask kind of what their assets and capabilities are, help them figure out what other opportunities they might be able to grow into from now moving forward. And then after we do the futures work, we say, hey, listen, we didn't predict the future. We've given you alternative scenarios how the future might work out. But you probably know enough to place a bet, right? Now, we give you a lot of work in terms of backcasting and signals monitoring so that once you place that bet, you either need to see things happening out in the world that confirm that bet, or disconfirming evidence that tell you the future is going to go someplace different. But once you've placed the bet, you can always pivot later. But you can't go back in time and place the bet, right?
Mhm.
And so I think one of the things that we try to do is help companies understand the opportunity cost of doing nothing radically outweighs doing something and having to pivot and change. There's an old saying, it may be a Japanese saying, that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is right now, right? So there's oftentimes there is a concern around uncertainty, and when there's a lot of uncertainty, there tends to be some stasis, some lack of movement, some analysis paralysis. The reality is uncertainty equals opportunity. Uh, if you could perfectly predict the future, by definition, you couldn't change it. The only reason you can grow your company and change your company and improve your company's position in the marketplace, make the world a better place, make your organization a better place, is that there is uncertainty. So uncertainty equals agency. Having
Mhm.
a highly uncertain liquid environment allows you to place bets and actually shape the future. So it's an incredibly difficult conversation to have with CEOs, but it's incredibly important. And I learned that going out on my own. I think that was huge for me. When I was inside corporations, I would be talking to CEOs and C-suites and saying, "Why aren't you doing this? Get started on that. Do this. Don't do that. This is dying. Shift over." And there was hesitancy. But then when you run your own company, your wife is your board of directors, and you got to hit payroll. you know? And then all of a sudden you start to realize some of the pressure that some of these CEOs running Fortune 500 companies are truly under every day. And so it allowed me to really help make the case for change and investment in uncertain times, because I had some little bit of empathy with what they were going through.
Right, because essentially you knew in a sense what they're going through. I mean, you could not have said that any better. A lot of people nowadays and companies as well, they are all just in this analysis paralysis. But as you mentioned, not doing anything is much worse than actually doing something. You miss
Mhm.
100% of the shots you don't take. That's just life.
Right.
So even though you may make mistakes on the way, which is completely normal, completely natural. A lot of people, especially in my generation, are afraid of making those mistakes. There's a lot of people
Yeah.
that can't bounce back from, and they're just so heavy and so focused on the past that they don't see the present or the future, right?
There was a lot of work done on younger generations and their um, growing up as gamers, right? And the initial thought was these guys are going to take all kinds of risk. That's how they learn to play these games. They go and they die. They go and they die. They go and they die, and they get better and better and better. We didn't anticipate kind of the social lock of social media and the consequences of negativity on social media. And so I
Mhm.
agree with you. I think it makes younger generations incredibly cautious um, in terms of making moves. But the management consulting was founded on the learning curve, the Bruce Henderson, um, BCG learning curve, right? Which basically said companies that get in first learn and create competencies that allow for them to dominate new industries. So it's important that you're failing forward. So even if you're placing a bet and you're failing, you're still learning something that your competitors don't know about. I spent 3 months building a RAG database to automate all my trends work. I spent a decent amount of time and effort and money building this thing. And then there was an update to Claude Project, and I could do the same work for $20 a month on Claude Project, right? But I learned so much about generative AI, how generative AI is programmed, how RAGs work, um, the limits of what you can do versus what humans can do, and that failure really allowed me to repoint my company in the age of AI to sort of talk about the differentiation of humans in an AI world,
Mhm.
because I was able to see the limitations of what generative AI was doing. Generative AI is a phenomenal tool, so I use it every day. But it's incredibly important to understand what it's good for and what it's not. And by going into literally the programming of LLMs and understanding how GPTs work, um, I was able to see at a programming level that at its core, generative AI is looking back. It's not building new content. It's not generative AI. It's more like regenerative AI, right? It's incredibly good at synthesizing vast amounts of information and giving you the most likely answer. But as we all know, the most unlikely thing happens every day in the future, right? An LLM is probably not going to predict a pandemic, a 9/11, some of these incredibly significant occurrences that dramatically shift um, the business environment. Uh, and it's certainly not going to help you find new opportunities, entirely new or different things to focus on because it doesn't have it. It's in its locker. It's using the past to generate answers. To use an old analogy, it's like driving your car looking in the rearview mirror.
Mhm. Yeah, I do agree on that in certain aspects. The biggest thing that I like to say with AI, automations, or anything in general with workflows is it helps complement the business. Now, you could give it input in order to predict to a certain extent. Now, obviously, it can't predict 100%, but to some degree, it could help alleviate some pains. It could, again, complement the business. It's just there's certain people going on a personal level. There's certain people that use ChatGPT, Deep AI, or any AI, other software to a certain level where they're using it every single day. Again, it just helps complement it, but you shouldn't really be focusing and depending on using it for everyday life. For even simple, mundane questions, why even bother asking ChatGPT for, I don't know, what should I wear today? Or, just simple tasks like that. But in regards to a business approach, I do agree with what you're saying. It does help, but it can't, if it doesn't have the input, then it would be like looking back at a rearview mirror. It could help in some extent, just not in the ways that people are wanting it to. And it's evolving every single day, AI. So what's happening now could be completely different. Well, it would be 10 years from now. We just don't know. We
Oh,
just
for
simply
sure.
don't know.
Sure. I mean, I think the path that we're on is not towards AGI though, artificial general intelligence. If you look at how LLMs are programmed, it's not going to get us there. It's going to get us to an approximation, but it's not going to get us there. But
Mhm,
between now and 10 years from now, there could be an entirely new approach that changes the game. So I think the lesson here is you have to embrace entirely new ways of thinking, and oftentimes LLMs or aren't going to be able to show you that.
mhm, mhm,
And even if you do discover it, you still have to have the organizational capacity to utilize it. So, when I was first getting into business, the big cautionary tale was Xerox PARC. So Xerox Palo Alto Research Center um, pioneered some unbelievable things. The graphic user interface, the mouse, Ethernet, and it never capitalized on any of those things. But three guys did. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates walked through that facility and realized, oh my gosh, this is the future of computing. And Apple and Windows went out and built the GUI, built the mouse, and the rest is history, right? Xerox did nothing with that. Xerox let Bob Metcalf walk out the door with the Ethernet he invented there, and he founded 3Com and made billions of dollars, right? So even if you do innovation within your company, if it's not set up to take advantage of it, um, you can lose. And the biggest one, probably that may go down in history, is the largest one ever, just happened. And it was Google, which is really scary because Google was deliberately set up not to do that, right? They remember the vaunted 20% of your time to work on whatever you want. We're going to be an innovation factory. We're going to do moonshots, all the rest, right? 7 people from Google invented generative AI in 2017. They took their 20% of time and they were working. Their bosses didn't even know what they were doing. And they published a paper called Attention is All You Need in 2017 that launched the generative AI revolution. Inside Google, they couldn't figure out what to do with it. Because they didn't want it to kill their cash cow, search, right?
Uh-huh.
Generative AI significantly threatened search. And search is probably one of the greatest money makers in the history of the world, right? Google makes a huge amount of money on search. So they didn't want to cannibalize their core business with this generative AI thing. So they put it on like translation or something, mostly. Meanwhile, 6 of the 7 people that wrote that paper left Google and founded multi-billion-dollar enterprises and launched a new industry that could be $1 trillion, right? Huge cautionary tale. It still happens. Um, you can be innovative, but if you don't have an organizational culture and a structure to take advantage of that innovation, to realize that you've got to put some bets down on the future and that you can't be overly constrained with the sunk cost of what you have now, you could lose. And I think Wired Magazine uh, did an unbelievable article on Google's discovery of LLMs and how they failed to take advantage of it. Incredible article. I love Wired. It's great that Wired Magazine's still putting out relevant stuff.
Just going back to what we spoke about, they just took a calculated risk. They rolled the dice, and look where they are now. 6 out of the 7 people are, doing very good in life, I should say. So,
Just
with
not inside their
just not
organization.
inside their organizations, Going on the early days of Wavepoint, did you have any limiting beliefs or market assumptions that kind of you had to dismantle right away in order to gain the credibility in terms of the clients you're reaching, especially in the Fortune 500 companies?
Yeah, I mean, there was a couple things we had to work on. First of all, I went into consulting thinking that I wasn't good at business development, right? I'm not a sales guy, right? And I had to change my mentality to, instead of thinking that I was doing sales, to say, you know what? I'm going to have a lot of really interesting conversations with cool people, and I'm going to really enjoy those conversations, and hopefully I'll get some work from it. And that completely shifted how I approached quote unquote business development. It became instead an intellectual journey. It became a way for me to improve my own craft, for me to get insight from people in business um, to build tools and methods and approaches that I hadn't thought about. Um, and that really shifted me in terms of moving from a hard sales approach to a more consultative relationship with folks. So I think that was a big one. The other one was, how do you get over being small, right? So like I say, I go after big game. So I I don't have a ton of employees. What I do is I get a big contract and then I build a team that is perfect for that job. And so these are 1099 employees, right? Who I've counted on and built over the years, um, that I know are going to be available when I go land some of the big clients. Um, Now, increasingly, I've had to do less of that because, to be honest with you, generative AI can do some heavy lifting. So
Uh-huh.
I would say I probably can use Gen AI for 50 to 60% of a lot of the background material work that I would be doing. Um, and so I need less of that. So I've shifted my company to be more about human relationships and not about trend reports. So the other thing that I really found doing the work was I thought I was going to produce these scenario reports, and the scenarios would get talked about throughout the organization, and that would shift people's minds. What I realized, it wasn't necessarily the end result, it was the journey that was important. Because you can't predict the future doesn't exist. It's not about building the best scenarios. It's about giving the leaders the best experience so that they can recognize the future when it happens.
I find the mindset you have is very spot on. At the end of the day, people are just so focused on the numbers. You, in the beginning, you did focus on the numbers in a natural extent, but then it came to a point where you're like, okay, why am I doing this? What exactly am I gaining? If I just focus on the sales, I'm not really growing myself to be the best consultative person I can be. So you kind of shifted that mindset to stop focusing on the sales and focusing on the genuine conversations and the connections you make along your journey. That's awesome. I love that. That's the same approach I have. At the end of the day, we love making money. That's just a byproduct of what we do in business. But essentially, it's just about the connections you make with people. That's what matters the most for the
Yeah, for
long term
me, the
gain.
money is the ability to keep doing what I love to do.
Hmm.
When I had spent like 10 years in retail before I decided to go to grad school. I had worked for a hardware store that had been around for 90 years. Um, and Home Depot came into the market and put it out of business in like 3, 4 years. And while I was there at the store level, I was doing some things that were keeping our margins up, even though we had a Home Depot down the street. And they promoted me to merchandising at headquarters, but didn't listen to anything I had to say. Um,
Mm.
and what I realized was that the leaders were walking around with a different view of the future. They had a different worldview about the future and competition than I did. And I went to grad school because I was like, I need to figure out how to help senior leaders think differently, and get out of the stuck official future that they're in. And I could have gotten an MBA program, but when I heard about futures, first of all, it's what I was deeply interested in, but also I felt like I could be a big fish in a small pond here, right? Because of my business background, I could apply futures thinking to innovation and strategy in business in a way that would be more soluble than a lot of the futurists that were out there now. Futurists who were incredibly good futurists, but couldn't really translate what they were saying for a business audience.
Mhm.
At the same time, though, I mean, this was back in the 90s. Like the futurist wasn't exactly a accepted term. It was kind of, oh, those are weirdos. Um, a lot of the best futurists weren't calling themselves futurists. They were calling themselves scenario planners, etc. Um, so going to grad school, I assumed my wife was going to be the main breadwinner, but I was like, I got to do what I'm passionate about doing. And turns out if you really pursue what you're passionate about, more than likely you're going to be successful and you're going to make the money you need to make. But you're absolutely right. It's not the main goal. If money's your main goal, I guess you can just stick in finance, and that may be great. Money was not my main goal. I needed to have a profession that I loved. And what's that old quote? Um, Chinese quote, do what you love and you'll never work another day in your life. I feel that way
Mhm.
sometimes. I do feel like it's a lot of work other times, right? If you're running your own business, there's no off the clock, there's no vacation. Um, every second you're on a family vacation, you got the laptop with you, and because you never know when you're going to need to pop in and do something. So now my routine on vacations is I get up before everybody else. I go get a cup of coffee and I spend just an hour and a half, 2 hours doing email triage, get it out of the way, and then I can have usually a full day of vacation with the family. But it is true that if you definitely find what you love to do. Um, and I've got 3 daughters. They're adults now. And that's what I've been counseling them on this whole time. And my middle daughter is looking at going to grad school, and she's not sure what she wants to do is going to be economically viable. And I'm like, if it's what you love, you'll figure it out.
Exactly. If it's what they love, they'll figure it out. At the end of the day, if you do a job that you enjoy, you're really not working. That's the beauty of it. You don't look at it as just like, oh man, I gotta go to work. Like, oh, I get to go to work. Like, great. You're so excited, and that's how it should be. running your business. Sure, there'll be days where you're like, why am I doing this? What's the point of doing this? There's days
Yeah.
like that. I'm sure you still have those days today. But then when you actually see the results you make for your clients, that's what matters most. So going on that, based on all the clients you've had, past, present, what's the single most dangerous strategic trap that most companies you see fall into, and how do you alleviate that stress point?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about before. So, one of the big things in futures thinking that Royal Dutch Shell figured out when they invented this stuff back in the 60s was that they did a longitudinal study of companies that have survived a long time. And this is in a book by Ari de Hoos called The Living Company, which is a phenomenal book. And they found that organizations that were able to recognize significant external change and adapt to that change while keeping their core values were able to survive and move on. Companies that were not able to change their understanding of the future or continue to work off an old understanding of the future would fail. So the first big thing is companies that are stuck on an official future.
Mhm,
Um, Now, because most companies don't have a discipline of thinking about the future, this official future is generally learned behavior. Like when you show up at the company and you learn how it runs and how it works, and you learn how the organization thinks about the future from everybody else around you. Second thing about the official future is once it's formed, the brain doesn't like to do any extra work. It doesn't want to change your official future, right? So it's either going to ignore information or it's going to warp it to fit. Um, and the third is your official future, because you formed it, is a little different than everybody else's in the room, right? So a lot of people inside organizations are walking around and making decisions every day based on a future that is wrong, outdated, and singular. And so a lot of my work is just getting folks to jettison that official future because it's old and it's wrong. By definition, humans can't predict the future. So if we're walking around with a single official future and we're making decisions on that, we shouldn't be doing that. We need to be looking scenatically. We need to be looking at a range of alternative futures, and we need to be talking collaboratively with each other about about the assumptions about the future.
mhm.
Because a lot of times companies will get in arguments with each other, like or executives, and you've probably had this where you've you've walked away from a conversation going, "That person's insane. Like, what are they thinking?" And the problem is we don't get down to the assumptions about the future that each of us are arguing about. And it turns out that I may have an assumption about the future that says everything's going to be local, customized, personalized. And you may have a future that says everything's going to be automated um, and mass produced, whatever. And we'll never get to that level and have that conversation. But instead, we're making a decision about a supply chain issue, and we'll both think the other person's insane, right? So exposing the official future and getting folks to blow it up and replace it with a set of scenarios that everybody understands and can relate to and talk about is really important. Um, Adam Kahane, when he did the Montfleur scenarios in South Africa, the de Klerk government in 1991 had made the decision to end apartheid in 1994, but nobody had an understanding of the path that the country could use to get there. So Royal Dutch Shell sent Adam Kahane down there, and he spent 3 years bringing this very broad coalition of many different kinds of stakeholders together to do a scenario planning process. And all of them agreed that there was only one path, that there were different scenarios, but there was only one path to true sustainable transformation of South Africa. And they labeled each of the different scenarios. So one was an ostrich, where the existing government just stuck their heads in the sand and pretended nothing was going to change. Another one was Icarus, where the new black majority government took over and they pumped the economy and it boomed, but then it fell. And then the one that succeeded was what everyone believed was called Flight of Flamingos. So a flight of flamingos takes a while. Flamingos take a while to get going. They don't look so pretty when they're trying to get off the ground, but once they're in the air and they're gliding, they can glide and fly for a very long time, right? So during the planning stages, then everybody would, all the policymakers would be able to have this language. And so if somebody proposed something like, hey, what if we gave majority shares to the new, black majority that comes in, they would say, ooh, that might be an Icarus strategy. That might boom, but then it's going to bust, right? So they had this working language together. And the extent to which you can do that within companies to get them to think scenarically, to get them to use the language of scenarios while they're planning, then you can get them down to the level of assumptions, and decision making happens a lot faster.
I love those examples you're pointing out. It really just truly showed to the fact that people need to essentially think outside the box. There's only so much that people can think internally in terms of like the direction they're going in, and just having that single line won't get you anywhere. You can have two lines going together, but if they're not connecting, nothing's going to work out. If you don't have outside of the box thinking or a strategist, and you're just doing what worked, let's say 40 years ago, sure, that like that worked 40 years ago, but does it work now? Not really. I mean, if you look at like home care, senior living, a lot of the systems that they have were built in the 80s and 90s. Sure, it still works, but does it work to the extent how it is nowadays? Not necessarily. So just going on like pivoting, as you mentioned, there's so many different ways to pivot. There's so many ways that we can adapt and react, but it's just going on to the fact it's people, the uncertainty. People are afraid to change. That's just normal. That's human nature. The brain
Yeah.
doesn't want to change. It only wants to conform to what it knows. But just anything in life, the only way to grow is to be uncomfortable, personal and professional. So as your company is growing, do you see anything in terms of internal friction in your internal processes that can have like a limiting constraint? Because I know you mentioned you use Gen AI, you get 1099 people. Besides those two core features, do you think anything that's kind of like roadblocking you in any aspects?
Yeah, there's a couple things I can mention. I think the toughest thing, and by the way, this isn't going to be unique to me. This is a universal problem as Gen AI comes online, which is how I would train young, um, new people to the profession who, I hang around the grad schools that are producing futurists, and I find the good ones, right? And I bring them on for projects, and slowly they move from, hey, I'm doing initial trend research to, I'm building facilitation plans to I'm actually facilitating. So I'm until they're like in the room, with the C-suite, and I can count on them to not just facilitate, but to add value to the conversations. That pipeline is broken now because I don't really need to bring him in. I told you I built a rag for that does 80% of my trend analysis. So they're doing I only need 20% of the work for that for humans, right? Um, so how am I going to the old model of training people to get them to the mid and the higher levels of my profession is kind of gone.
Mhm.
Um, you know, unless I'm magnanimous and just pay a bunch of money when I don't need to, when I can automate a lot of things, right? And a lot of companies are going to be dealing with this. A lot of the intro work that recent college grads or even grad school grads would come in and do is getting automated away, right? And yet those people are not yet qualified, and not just in terms of skills, but just in terms of business wisdom, acumen, and experience to immediately come in the mid range, right? And start working at the midpoint. So I think there's a huge issue coming up with Gen AI in terms of how do we build the experience of the next generation safely, appropriately, in an age when generative AI is automating a lot of that intro work. So for me, that's going to be a big point of friction, which is so yeah. Now I'm taking my folks and I'm throwing them in the deep end. To be honest, I'm counting on them to co-facilitate, maybe without all of the experience that they probably need to be there in front of, and so I do think there's a lot more education that probably has to happen Companies are going to have to sponsor at educational level so that people are doing that work inside safe academic spaces where it's not about efficiency, it's not getting automated away, whatever. So they can build that initial work more time creating a business context so that when they do come into work, they're already at a higher level that they need to be. That's going to be a big one. The big one that's happening now with me is companies just don't understand the limitations of AI. Um, they continue to use these tools thinking they're getting good futures work out of just asking an LLM, "Hey, what's the future of my industry?" Yeah, they will get the official future from an LLM. They will get a consensus view of what everybody has been saying about the future of that industry. And what do we know about that? We know it's wrong. But more importantly, if all you and all your competitors are asking Gen AI and Gen AI is giving you the same answer, you and your competitors, you're all chasing the same opportunities. And so immediately becomes a red ocean. You have immense competition in the spaces that Gen AI is pointing everybody to. I think on my website I call it a knife fight in a phone booth, right? Why do that? You need to augment those LLMs with human-led foresight that is going to allow you to see differentiated opportunities and actually build your own blue oceans, um, non-competitive spaces where you come in as the first entrant. You don't have as much competition, and you can grow and get to profitability much faster. So I think that's the biggest problem, and it's especially bad because every 3 months, Gen AI is changing, right? It keeps adding new features, it keeps expanding, it keeps growing. Um, and so making sure that we're educating our clients on, great, what it's good at, but also the limitations of generative AI are gonna be super important.
As Ronald Reagan once said, you have to trust but verify. Going back to what I said earlier, there's only so much AI can do. It could complement the business, but if you're asking these generic questions, like what's my business going to be like in 10 years from now? It'll give you a generic answer, but it's not like specific. It can't predict the future. And as you mentioned, having that educational conversation with clients, with individuals, once they truly understand the actual limitations of Gen AI, then they can go into more of a better outlook in life, so to speak. Because so many people think, oh, let me just chuck in an AI. Like, AI knows everything. AI doesn't know everything. It's just programmed on information that humans fed it. At the end of the day,
Well, and
it's
unfortunately, increasingly, it's getting programmed on information that it's feeding itself, which
mm,
is gonna be another interesting problem.
true. Yeah. True, true, true. And
Yeah,
I
I think the question here is, um, can companies keep up with what generative AI is doing and how it's growing so that it continually understands where it should be appropriately applied and where humans are going to need to, at the very least, to augment, if not lead, um, the strategic conversations around things.
mhm,
Um, and the speed is just phenomenal. The advancements are ridiculous, and so it becomes almost a quarterly thing for me to just keep updating my clients, and I'm also showing them how I'm experimenting with it as well. And so I'm able to say, "Hey, listen, I threw this in. I just tried this. I just tried Notebook LM's new video feature. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't. Um, you know, I'm going to share it with you." And so you can become an educator as you go in terms of some of these future trends. Um, that the key here is that when you're going through, and because I've done this long enough, Gen AI is not the first, big thing, right? Obviously, I started working when the internet started, right? And seeing the internet grow. And then from the internet, starting to see, you know, geography based services. And then the mobile internet, right? And then social media. Um, so each one of those technological innovations led to sort of similar conversations around what it's good at, what it's not good at, how do we apply it, where does it challenge our existing businesses, etc. I would say this is a order of magnitude larger. Um, looking back in history, this will be, that 2017 article, "Attention is all you need," is going to be listed in the history books as one of the seminal moments in history of mankind, right? It's that big of a thing. Um, so, but we can learn from previous big things, and we
Mhm.
can learn from previous big shifts, not just technology shifts, but social shifts as well. To put it in context, right? The bottom line is people are still getting up, brushing their teeth, and going to work every day. Now, that work could be at home. That work could be in an office. That work could be in a car. That work could be in a virtual space. But there are certain sort of core values of humans that continue. And I think as businesses, if we can understand what those core values are of humans, and then really look for those spaces of conflict, like where is modern life making humans kind of make those trade-offs um, as new technologies develop, that's a great space to innovate into. Like where are their pain points, but where are there competing trends and counter trends? And you don't have to guess the future, right, between the trend or the counter trend. You just have to find those spaces where that's happening and then try to provide solutions.
Mhm. I think I believe the interesting thing is going back on people that you're trying to get recent grads is their whole life it revolved around technology, the internet. So they've had that throughout their whole life, from when they first walked their steps to when they. I mean, for me, for example, I've been playing games on computer since I was about 6.
Yeah,
Okay, like my whole life, I've divulged in the computer, DSs, Xboxes. So like that's a way of life. But comparing like you, for example, where you didn't have that growing up and going into the workforce as well, you didn't have all this technology. I mean, my grandma, she took, or not my grandma, my mother, she took typewriting classes in high school.
sure.
You don't have that anymore because that's not a huge thing nowadays. It just evolves into, sure, some jobs with AI will be lost because, as you mentioned before, about entry level work. It's very hard nowadays for certain individuals in certain niches to get that entry level because AI is taking it away in some aspect to help grow the company. So that is, an off, but then it also revolves around the fact, as I mentioned, there will be some jobs that will be lost, but other jobs that will grow. I've seen programs in colleges where they're focusing on AI, more computing and coding, and not coding in a sense because AI can do that, but just how to work AI, the gravitational pull towards that. And I think that's phenomenal because people want to understand AI. People want to learn how it can not only improve their life, but also the life of companies. And it's going back to just the core values too. As you mentioned, even though if we're working in different niches, we're all doing the same stuff. If you think about if you strip everything down, we're all doing the same core values. We get up, we go to work, we do X, Y, and Z. During work, we're eating, we're communicating. So we just have the basic core functions. So based on everything that you've learned in your whole career, not just in terms of foresight, well, mainly in foresight, because this is kind of leading into my question. What's a non-negotiable that you have in your guiding principle that other leaders in the foresight or leadership space could get and provide value to?
So I think as futurists, we're a pretty small community. I helped co-found the Association of Professional Futurists about, I don't know, uh, 20 years ago, 22 years ago, something like that.
Oh, it's
Originally,
awesome.
it was 20 or 30 of us just thinking it was going to be a boondoggle where we could just take a weekend once a year and go someplace warm and talk about the future. And now it's a global organization with I don't know even know how many members. Um, and but it's an incredibly vibrant community in terms of sharing with each other. Like you know, we're very open because we know that if we share with somebody else, they're going to share with us, and our craft gets better. Um, so I think for me, one of my most important mentors in life was a man named Napier Collins, who co-founded Global Business Network after being part of Royal Dutch Shell's seminal work in scenario planning. And Napier is very finely known by many, many, many people um, as this incredible networker. Um, I met him when he was 75 years old, and he ended up mentoring me for the next 15, almost 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I wasn't alone in that. He continued to meet people, bring them into the profession, introduce them to others in the profession, how, take a stake in their success, right? And for me, that is easily the most important thing that I've learned is that connections matter. That you should continually be looking at people who need to be connected into the network, who need to be part of the conversation, and to be hosting and making those conversations together. So for a very long time, I was the gatherings chair for the APF annual meetings. And so we would have um, meetings in Las Vegas, in Vancouver, in Santa Fe, New Mexico, all themed. And it was all about bringing folks in the profession together, making those connections, learning together, and growing the profession into what it is today. Um, that all goes back to just Napier, just being Napier. He was an amazing, amazing person. And, Global Business Network, which was seminal in the field of expanding scenario planning. They were the first consultancy kind of to really push scenario planning. They were all founded by Royal Dutch Shell folks. But it went by GBN, and everybody said, the name of it is Global Business Network, but everybody called it Global Buddies of Napier, because he just knew so many people. If you read The Tipping Point, right, he was a classic connector. He knew everybody at all different strata of society, and I think futurists need to be out there playing in the world. We need to be those same kind of connectors. You never know where important information about the future is going to come from, right? It could come from vastly different conferences and locations and people. Um, I was doing some work for PepsiCo, and we were also supporting Maker Faire Africa. So I was in Ghana, and I was talking to people on the African continent. And it became really clear that things in Egypt were at a flashpoint, right? You had a lot of educated young men with nothing to do, which is always a bad idea. But social media was starting. And so when I went back, I was doing a workshop for executives at PepsiCo, and I was talking to them about foresight. And I said, here's an example. I'm just coming back from Accra. I'm putting these different things together. My guess is there's going to be a revolution in Egypt within a couple years, right? And then um, um, Arab Spring happened, right? Um, I don't know that I would have been able to sort of make those connections if I hadn't been on the ground in Accra, Ghana, out of my comfort zone, at a Maker Faire uh, meeting, right? So I wouldn't have been there. So I think a lot of what we need to understand is we can't just do our research sitting behind a computer. We got to get out in the world and make those connections, talk to people, and talk to many different kinds of people, so that we can form better views of what may happen.
At the end of the day, it's all about the personal connections, and you just never know who you're gonna walk in life with. Someone you may have saw that might be down. I mean, for example, to go on to another person who I brought onto the podcast, Cody Mills. He was out one day and he saw some guy that looked like he was broken down, thought this guy was homeless, so he helped him out, helped kind of not really get him back on his feet, but the guy was just there for no reason, like, "Oh, hey, you want some water? You want some chips? Like, here's my card, by the way. If you ever need anything, like, give me a call." It turned out this guy to be his absolute best customer. This guy owns like 17 different shops. He's a diesel mechanic by trade, and this guy is very successful. He makes a lot of money, but at a first glance, You didn't think that. He said, "I thought this guy was homeless," right? But he still went out of his way. It's not about how the world treats you, it essentially is about how you treat the world, right? And if you have that mindset and you connect with anybody you could, not just in terms of like business sense, not in terms of like, oh, what can I get out of this? Just having that connection, because at the end of the day, it's all about the connections. That's what truly matters, not just in business, but just in life in general. And I think that's beautiful. How everything that you're doing, even just that one person that you mentioned, they had so many connections and that made into a whole different framework and network that you guys honestly didn't think it would achieved. But look at it now. It grew into a more global aspect instead of just, a weekend trip to, Florida or somewhere warm. Besides the connection aspect, before we wrap up here, what's a personal trait that you have either in your personal or your professional life that really helped you excel and achieve the success you have so far?
I think for me is I'm always innovating in my profession. So, um, for some reason, and maybe it's because I was a Navy brat growing up. I lived in, let's see, Norfolk, San Diego, Okinawa, Japan, Tehran, Iran. Um, did a lot of traveling through Europe as a kid. Um, and coming back to the States, I almost always have had almost an outsider view of things. And I've had an ability to step back from a problem, let it sit, and then somehow, my brain thinks of a completely different approach. Um, you know, I think my parents, my mother especially, super competitive. We used to play a lot of board games, a lot of card games, a lot of that stuff. Um, so I'm constantly innovating in my profession. So I'm continually creating new tools and methodologies, based on what I think my clients need, but also new things that show up in the world. So right now I'm building an entirely new way of doing foresight based on assembly theory, which is a new scientific theory about how life begins. Um, and I looked at it and I said, "Hey, wait a minute. That has a lot of similarities with how we do foresight. Let me see if I can pull some of those tools and methods in and have a different lens into what I'm doing." So I think that that's important for me. It's important for my clients to be able to continually innovate facilitation tools, new ways of thinking about things, um, constantly creating new lenses on the future that hopefully, their competitors don't have.
I truly believe one of the reasons why you are the way you are is based on the different locations you lived at. A lot of people in the States, they don't travel outside of the United States. So they're just they're in their own bubble, so to speak, right? Like when you go out of the country, it's completely different. The mindsets, the way life is operated is completely different. And once people acknowledge that, they're like, whoa, like what's going on over here in the United States? But you had that growing up. You had that in your life, so you kind of understood the different lifestyles, the different facades of life. That's excellent. I love that approach. So what's with everything that's been going on so far, before we end it here, people that are listening, people that are watching this, what's the best place for them to reach you at?
Sure. Well, the best way to start engaging is just through my website, wavepoint.net. Um, I've got a contact page on there. I've got a blog where I put up articles. I generally I have a column that I write in twice a year for Research Technology Management Journal. It's kind of behind a firewall, but usually I can post things afterwards. Um, and then, yeah, I tend not to do too much posting on LinkedIn, to be honest. I'm a bit more of a lurker. I should I should I should contribute more to the LinkedIn community. I think it's an important community, and I think the people that post on there a lot are fantastic. And I get a lot of enjoyment. I should probably do more of that, but certainly my website's the easiest way. I do speaking engagements 3 or 4 times a year. Most of them are proprietary, but, we'll see. We'll see. Maybe I'll be like you, Kevin. I'll launch something and I'll launch a blog or a
You never
podcast.
know.
Yeah,
You never know where life will take you.
yeah.
That's the beauty of life, isn't it?
Well, again, given my profession, we like to know where life would take us,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
we know that the good news is the future always surprises, right? In some ways, in my profession, if you do your job right, you're not asked back for a couple years. So typically, you're always finding new clients. So what's great about my profession is you're you're not just hanging out with the same old people all the time. Like you're building this huge network of companies that you've worked for because it takes a couple years before you're asked back. I mean, if you do a set of scenarios that are 3 to 5 years out and you do a decent job, they don't need you back for 3 or 5 years, right? So, it's nice that in my line of business, my clients and who I know continues to expand.
Mhm. Alright, yeah, no, it's just going back to the who you know, right? It's just going on you helped them in the past, like, "Wow, this guy's excellent, so I'm just gonna bring him back." It's about even though, like, they may not need you for 3 or 5 years, you help them get to that point, and then when they truly need you, that's when they bring you back in again. That shows the loyalty, the strategic plans you have in the business and in life.
Well, that is one thing that I did change in my approach was I did 2 things. First of all, I didn't just do foresight. I leaned in further into strategy and innovation.
Mm,
So, not just doing the foresight, but then spending them a lot of time doing innovation and strategy so I could stay with some of those clients for a longer period of time. And then I also built in retainer models, which
mhm.
allowed me to stay with the same client for a long period of time. And so, yeah, maybe I go in and do big scenarios initially, but then with the retainer, they can call me up and say, hey, listen, you know, here's a new development in my industry. I just need a quick future of X. Give me something in 2 or 3 weeks, right? And so I'm on call with them. And it's been fascinating to have not just a lot of new relationships, but, continued deep relationships with a few 3 or 4 companies that I've been doing business with now for, 10 years.
Those are the ones that count at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Even though new clients are good, when you have that huge rapport building, that's really what matters most. It just goes on to show that the connection that you made with those individuals are truly long lasting and
Yeah, and
beneficial.
when they pick up the phone, I answer, right?
You
And
gotta,
and I make them a priority for sure.
you gotta. That's all it is. Well, Christian, thank you again for coming on today. I truly appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insights.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Thanks for setting this up. It was a good
Of course,
conversation.
of course, my pleasure. Thank you again.
All right. Bye-bye.